So up to this point, we've been creating files in REPL-IT in single file, and that's not optimal. And when you create real programs, you are going to need multiple files. In order to do that, you will need to create other files so that you can reuse whatever libraries you have. To do that, we have to create other files. So in this example, we can go, for example, and create some of the functions that we have for strings and copy them over from REPL-IT and create files that we can then reuse. So let's go ahead and copy the file, and I think it's this one. So let's go ahead and copy the code from there, and we're going to copy it into our Visual Studio Code. So what we want to do is take all of this content, copy it over so we can drop it into our Visual Studio project. So let's create a brand new file and let's give it a name. Let's now paste everything into this file. But in this file, we have everything. We have a main and we have all of this. This file, what we want, we can get rid of all these includes because we're going to include those in our H file for this file because this file is going to have a corresponding H file. So we only want the definitions in this file. And let's go ahead and create the H file, and we give it the same name with the extension of H. So this file has everything, and let's copy it over into our H file. But we don't need main because we can only have one main in our program. So let's go ahead and get rid of main. And we also don't want the function definitions, we only want the declarations. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Oh, that didn't work, so let's try again. Let's get rid of the definition and just keep the declaration. And we do this for all the files. Now, if this was an actual H file in a real program, you would want to add maybe some comments to describe what your functions do. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's go ahead and include the files that we need to make this program work. So in this file, we can include all the header files that we need for this to work. So we need stdio.h, string.h, and let's go ahead and add everything we need. So we also need C type for the upper, two upper functions. And let's add a comment to tell what this function does. Now we would do this for all the functions, but in this case, let's just do it for this one. So we would want to describe what the function does in case somebody else wants to read the file. Now keep in mind that sometimes in other programs, or when you get a program, you may not get the source files, but you will get the H files most of the time, so you can see all the definitions. So we just describe it. And let's see, I screwed up the comment. Well, we can fix that in a second. Let's go ahead and fix the comment. And now we have this. One thing to keep in mind when you define your own source files, your own H files, one thing you want to do, and we haven't talked about it much, but it's called a preprocessor directive. Now, you've used preprocessor directives, as in the case of the includes. What you want to do is you want to define this file. So you just use the if not defined, so it's if and def, and you give it the same name as the file, all in uppercase underscore age. So my string funcs underscore age, and then just below it you define it. And this is so that if you reference this file from multiple places in your code, that it will only define it one time, because if you don't, you will have compiler issues or maybe even preprocessor issues, And we close this all off by ending it with an end if preprocessor directive. This ensures that we only have one definition of my string funcs. So we only have the declarations here, and that's all we want in this file. We want the declarations and we want the definitions in the C file. So I think we are done here. So let's go to our C file. And in our C file, we want the definitions. And you notice that I removed the includes. I can still include the MyString functions.h, and that's gonna bring over automatically everything else that this requires. So I don't have to include stdio and string.h and those other types. So I don't have to do that. So I can just do that. And notice that I'm using double quotes. Anytime you use double quotes, it's for the file that you have created yourself. So this main, the way we test it, we're going to create a test file to test our function, and we will create a separate file to test this functionality. We won't do it in the main of the main program. We can just create a test file and we can give it an appropriate name. By convention, I like to name it test underscore and then whatever I'm testing. So let's create a new file and give it a name. Once we do that, we can bring in the main and we can include stdio, because all files should probably include stdio. And it's no problem that you're including it for multiple places because they already handle the if and def in their own files. So in this case, we include the stdio and we also include the file that we created, our own custom file, mystringfuncs.h, and that brings everything that we need. So we are about ready to compile. And as you can see, we have an indicator that says we need to save our files. So we go ahead and save all our files. And let's go ahead and do that. Save all. The indicator goes away. Let's go ahead and compile this code. So using our GCC command, -o, and we give it a name for the executable. So stringtest.exe. And we include the files. So we have to include only the C files, not the H files. So we include the test mystringfuncs.c and we include the mystringfuncs.c. So it'll have that. And as you can see, we get an error. So let's go look at what this error is. So it's telling us that there's multiple definitions of main, and we probably left the main behind in one of the files, so we have to go and get rid of it. And we see that we have main. We don't need this, so let's get rid of it because we can only define it one time in our application. And that goes with any file. You can only define the same function only one time. So let's run it again and see what happens. As you can see, no errors, and it created a file. And if you look on the left, it created the exe file. Now we can run our exe by running the command, and there you are. Everything still works. So let's try doing this once again so you can get better practice. Let's create another file. So let's say, for example, that we had some functionality that we wanted for arrays, and let's say that we wanted to create functionality for arrays, so we perform the same process all over again. Let's create our myArrays file, and we create a C file. And let's go ahead and write our function there. And we will need a C file and an H file. So let's go ahead and fill them in, and we can include stdio.h because that's what we need at a minimum. And let's define our function. Let's call it by int, because if we wanted to do floats, we could also do it for floats and strings. So they need different names. The files need different names. So we have our array, and as usual, we give it the length, and we can just do a couple of printfs. We do it in a loop. We initialize our for loop, I less than length. And I++. And then we could just do a printf to display the contents. Our new line character, and we can display the contents of our array. So let's go ahead and do that, and we're going to show which element of the array we're in, and let's display the contents of the element, the value of the element. So here we just do I, and then comma, and then the value of the array. And that should do it. We also need to add the declaration of this function in our H file, and we can add comments to what it does. Let's go ahead and create our H file. We can simply copy this, go to our H file and paste it. And at a minimum, let's include the stdio.h. At this point, we only need the declaration, we don't need the definition, so we get rid of the body of the function. At this point, we should have included the if and def. We can come back to that. And just keep in mind that if you do this like this and you don't include the if and def, if you include this file, this H file from other locations, the compiler will try to define display array int from multiple places, and you don't want that. So we're also going to have to create a file to test this, and we can write our main there. So we include our stdio.io.h as usual, and we can create a main function. And let's go ahead and test it. We can call our function. One thing I did forget up to this point, and I can go back and add, I have to include my H file for my array functions. And let's just go ahead and add some values, 10 values that we want to add. And let's just add 0 for the remainder of them. Let's go ahead and include the arrays.h file that we created so that we can actually have access to that functionality. And let's see what we called it, display array int. So let's go back and call display array int and pass in my array. And for now, let's just call the length. I'm sure you already know how to get the length of an array. We've talked about it in previous videos. So we just display 10 elements of the array because that's all there is in it. And we're about ready to go in and compile. But first we have to save all our files. So we just click save all. And we run our GCC command. And we're going to have to tell it what files we want to compile. Of course, we have to give it the name of the exe that we want to create. And we give it the name of the files. So we can add as many files here as we want, and we go ahead and compile. And you notice it compiled. So now we are ready to run it. And you notice on the left hand side it added that file. So it displays and it shows that it works. It displays our array. There's other ways to test. Sometimes you just want to test the value that returns from the function. In this case, we want to display it because we want to see that it actually returns and displays what we told it to do. Told it to display. So up to this point, we haven't talked much about preprocessor directives, but preprocessor directives allow you to do basically three things, and we've used it in includes. So you can use them to include other files, or you can use them to define constants, and you can use them to define macros. So for example, you may want to define some constants. Let's create a new file, an H file. So, and the first thing we want to do is do the if and if as with any other files. And so define it with where it matches the file name myconst_age, and we define it. And of course, we'd have to end it by calling end if. If you forget to end if, you will probably run into problems. Don't forget that. So then we can define constants, and we haven't done it up to this point. I was kind of saving it for last for this piece of the tutorial sessions, but if you ever need constants, you should always use constants that have the name instead of using what is called magic numbers or magic strings. So let's, for example, say we define pi and we enclose it in parentheses, and we take 22.0 over 7.0, and anywhere it sees that, it'll do the math and calculate pi. So let's go ahead and define, for example, another constant, and this time let's take another constant and do for example, min drinking age or smoking age, and we give it a number. So now whenever it sees min smoking age anywhere, the compiler will actually take and replace your code. It'll replace min smoking age with the number 18. So, for example, if we were to write if 21 less than min smoking age, it would actually replace it with the number 18. Now, your code doesn't change, it just replaces it in the actual compiled code with that value. So, we don't necessarily want to add min smoking equals 18, because then it will replace wherever it sees min smoking age with equals 18, and you don't want that. And you don't want to add semicolons at the end either, because it would actually replace that with 18 colon, and of course that'll give you a compiler error. So this is the simple way to do defines. So let's get rid of the semicolon because that's not supposed to be there. Once we do that, then we can include that in, let's write a quick test file so that we can test that our constants and definitions are actually working. So let's go ahead and do that. And as usual, let's go ahead and include stdio.age. Let's create our main, and we have no parameters, so let's just go with void, and let's return 0. We're gonna print our constant, so let's go ahead and print pi, and it's going to give us the value of pi. And we also have to include our H file, and something I always forget, but include your H file, otherwise you'll get a undefined or I think implicit definition or some error similar to that. So we do that, and let's also do it for the min age. And this is an integer, so let's treat it like an integer, and it's min smoking age, so let's go ahead and place that in there. Well, it would be nice if it did IntelliSense and it just kind of auto-completed that, but it doesn't do that. So one thing I left out here is a return. Let's see if it gives me an error. It's probably going to give me an error. So let's go ahead and compile. And we give it, of course, first thing first, we give it the name of the executable that we want to create, const test, or just const .exe. And we give it the file that we want to compile, so test const.c, and it gives us an error, and that is because I think because we have the return issue. So let's put a return statement. I had a file name that was wrong. It's const. It should be my const. So let's do that. It compiles. It should not compile because I should be returning 0, but apparently the compiler didn't catch that, and it still works. But always make sure you return your values. In this case, I forgot to include my return statement, and I don't want to go back and create a new video, but just remember, this is int main, so it should be returning integer, which it's not doing. And for some reason, the compiler still says, "Oh, it's okay. It works anyway." So just keep those things in mind when you do that. That you have to use the if and def when you define your own and you do that in the H file. You don't do that in the C file. So let's take a look at the other H files. We have the if and def, and you should have that in end if. And one thing I forgot, if I define, okay, I did do the if and if. I thought I didn't almost. So in this one, I forgot to include the if and def, and everything still worked. But see, the only reason that it worked is because I'm not including this H from multiple files. If I was including this H file from multiple files, then at compile time, it would actually give me an error because it will try to recompile this same function from those other files because they're referencing it. And so the way to get around that, you have to add the if and def and define. If you just remember to add this to your files, then everything will be okay. Now, the other thing is that you don't want to define the same file. Even if you do the if and def and you have different files, but define the same function with the same parameters, same name, same return, it is going to give you errors as well because you're defining the same thing more than once. So you don't want to do that. So I've covered everything I needed to cover at this point. Hopefully you got something out of it, and you know how to build programs with multiple files. So when you actually build real world applications, you're going to have to build applications that actually have a lot more files, and it gets a little more complicated. And one thing about the preprocessor directives, you don't want to get too carried away. You can do a lot of different things. You could basically redefine the language, but don't do that. Don't do that because it can create a lot of problems, and especially for other people that have to maintain the code. So this concludes this session, and if you like it, go ahead and subscribe, share it, like it, and thanks for watching. Until next time, and just keep watching. More good videos coming your way. Thank you.